Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Hardcore. I'm Miko and over there we have Celestina.
Hey guys, welcome.
Today we're going to talk about the topic that Celestina requested, digestion. She is a registered dietitian, so we're going to get some deeper insights from that perspective as well. We're not just going to be sticking to human design today. The elements that we're going to be looking at in the human design chart are the variables and something called determination. That information is found within the variables. It's found within the color, tones, and bases. So it goes much deeper into your human design. And what we wanted to mention right from the get-go, which we forgot to mention in the last episode because we were talking about the arrows and the variables in that aspect as well, this changes super quickly. So if you don't have your exact time of birth, it may be different within a few minutes even. So just bear that in mind. It's always going to come back down to how you choose your food using your strategy and inner authority. But the information that we're going to share here is still going to be interesting, even if you're not 100% sure about your birth time. And if you're not, then play around with it. So if you have maybe half an hour of difference, even if you believe it is the absolute correct time of birth, if your parents were not standing there with a stopwatch, I would recommend still testing out a few minutes before, a few minutes after, just to see if this arrow that we're going to be focusing on mainly is going to be changing. Would you like to get started with this topic today, Celestina?
Hoo-wee, yeah. So it's very interesting because whether it's pointing left or whether it's pointing right, it's going to tell you a lot about you. And there's 6 different themes within digestion. We're going to be going through all 6 of them and I guess the dualities of them as well. All right, guys, so we're going to start with the upper left-hand arrow. That is what we're looking at today. So yes, there are 4 arrows at the top of your chart. They all say a lot more about your specific human design, but today we're looking at the upper left-hand, which is determination. So whether yours is pointing left or right, it's going to tell you something extremely important about the way that you best digest food as well as digest information. And the first time I heard this, as Miko mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian in the States. It was really interesting to me that one's nutrition needs could be determined by looking at their chart. And obviously I took this with a grain of salt, a little bit of skepticism, played around with it myself, because what is this world if not a journey to understand yourself better and playing around with it? And there's a wee bit of validity in this, and I think that that's pretty dope. Again, take this into your own experiment, right? Like everything that we're saying, take this into your own experiment and play around with it, whether it's playing around with your birth time and figuring out the arrows that feel most aligned, or playing with what we're talking about as we dig deeper into the determinations, that the 12 different determinations that you could possibly have on your chart.
Yes. When I first encountered this, to me as well, it was very interesting. I like the approach that it's not necessarily linked to a special diet that you're supposed to be following. We are going to get into eating meat versus being a vegetarian or a vegan just a little bit. We're going to scratch the surface on that. And there are more informations in your chart regarding certain food preferences or types, things that you would digest easier or less easy. And when we're looking at the determination part, so the top left arrow is also connected to the physical health system. And the determination part is going to tell us how we digest best, as Celestina mentioned. And so the first one we're going to be looking at is called appetite. And you will have the option of looking at the arrow pointing to the left and or pointing to the right. And that gives a difference in how you would be following this determination called appetite. So if it's pointing to the left, it's going to be a consecutive digestion that you're going to be following. If it's pointing to the right, it's an alternating digestion type. And really, if this rings a bell and if it's written somewhere on your human design chart, so for you, you don't have to know the details of why it's showing up like that. You will have it written on your human design chart. It depends which one you're using. So it's usually something that is only shown in advanced versions. But there are also some charts, calculators that will show this for you. In this case, consecutive means that you need to literally eat one thing after the other. So if you have a plate of food and you have beans on there and rice on there and meat on there, you would start with one of these elements first, you would finish it, and then you would move on to the next. The other version of that, if your arrow is pointing to the right, is called alternating. So you would eat one piece of food, so you would eat the beans, then you would go to the rice, then you would go back to the beans, then you would go to the meat, then you would get back to the rice. So you would just not mix it all together. You would eat it separately, but go back and forth between those things. And this sounds super crazy to anyone who doesn't have this type of digestion. But if you do have it, if you genuinely do have it, and you're not very conditioned by your parents who forced you in eating things differently, then you will naturally do this. So I have a friend of mine who follows this diet. When I found out about human design and I told her about her digestion type, I was really hesitant and I thought, can I really be telling her this? And then I told her and she was like, yeah, this is how I eat. And I was like, are you serious? I didn't believe it. And I thought it was going to be a bit, no, I don't want to eat like that or something along those lines. But she doesn't like curries, for example. She doesn't like foods with a lot of different herbs. It's very clean and simple. And that is how she eats. Naturally.
Super cool when someone is in tune and they've been allowed to kind of experience that their whole lives too. She was like, no, that's just it.
Well, yeah, and the fascinating thing is that she is one of my main examples that I always pull up when it's about you don't need to know human design to actually live in alignment. So she is someone that meditates a lot. She does a lot of yoga. She's very alternative in her choices of medicine. She has gone through a lot. She wrote a book about her experience and it's becoming more and more famous at the moment, more and more validated as well by doctors because she had a near-death experience and all of her memory was wiped. So this is again something, and she never got it back. And this is again something that is very interesting when it comes to human design. Because I don't know if the conditioning goes away with that as well. If you have to relearn everything. I found that very fascinating. But to me, she is, when I look at her chart, when I look how she lives, she is one of the most aligned people that I know.
Damn. So really, we have to lose our memories to get into alignment. Heard. Kidding, guys. That was a joke. That was a joke. All right. Next up, taste. This is a fun one. So open taste if your arrow is pointing left, closed if it's pointing right. And open taste, basically, if you know someone or if you are that person who eats the exact same thing for breakfast, you're cool with having a PB&J for lunch, you're cool with having the exact same thing for dinner, open taste, man. Every day you're down with the same thing. I find that with those with open taste, the more you can focus on seasonality and variety, like throughout the seasons, that can be really helpful as well, right? To not just eat the exact same thing every day, but eating seasonally when you have open taste can be really nourishing. And I mean that from like a nutritious, like dietitian perspective, not just like a you eat PB&J every day, cool kind of perspective. And it is like you are able to try new foods with open taste, right? Just because those dino nuggets and PB&Js are your favorite, or maybe are your kiddo's favorite, right? Like if you feel like you have a picky eater as a kid, this could be something really fun to try, is reintroducing foods, and this person will know right away if they do or do not like it, right? But continuously reintroducing these foods and allowing that person, or allowing yourself, if you are an adult listening to this, to try and taste those foods can be really helpful. And I feel like from a dietitian perspective, right, I was always saying, like, reintroduce and don't force, right? Like, you don't want to bring a negative experience to that reintroduction of food, whether it's a child or an adult, because let me tell you, there were many a times where an adult I was working with refused to eat vegetables, but they refused to eat vegetables because of the way it was cooked or processed or something along those lines. And we'll talk more about some of these different aspects in just a bit, but like, whether if it was hot or cold could make a difference for that human, right? So I think that's really important if you are a parent and if you have picky kiddos, to really take what we're talking about today into account, and learning what the people in your family's determinations are, so that everyone is kind of happy and kind of getting the nutrition that they need, both, again, from a dietitian standpoint, but also from a human design standpoint, that they're nourished as well. So that was my little tangent off of open taste. Closed taste. Closed taste. Similarly, you're here to also try one thing, stick with it, and that might be your favorite food for a hot minute, right? However, with closed taste, you are going to know if it tastes good or if it does not taste good for you, with no need to try it out for yourself. So it's more of like this inner knowing of, nope, that's not for me, and that's okay, rather than with the open taste, trying at least once and then determining yay or nay. Closed taste, you will know kind of inherently if it is for you or not for you. And don't let anyone judge you if you bring PB&J sandwiches out to a restaurant because you don't want anything else there.
Oh my God. So this is my...
and Nico's take on it.
No, I mean, this is my determination. So you make me sound like I'm eating PB&J all day long.
You don't eat PB&J all day long. I think you actually have quite an interestingly refined palate.
Yeah, and the challenge is, so I am open taste, and I've traveled the world, and I've had foods from the countries where they are from, basically. So that makes things quite challenging, because my palate is very refined, and I'm very, very picky on the quality, as you say, regarding also being in season, and we need to focus on local products, and it should be fresh as well. So that's the best way that we can eat. And actually the lower two, so appetite is number one, taste is number two. So these lower twos are very much connected still to hunter and gatherer. So they're still regarding going out to search for food. So that's why we're supposed to look for locally grown products and things that are in season. I mean, this is generally great advice coming as well from the nutritionist, but it's just going to lead to a healthier diet in general, especially with open and closed tastes. The only thing that I would add here as well is that Celestina already touched on it. So if you have a kid, the taste is of course going to be very important for these kids. So yes, a closed taste is going to be less adventurous, and they're probably going to stick to the same thing over and over and over again. An open taste can be a bit more daring, but I also have foods that, depending where I am, I will eat them over and over and over again. And it is really interesting when I look at my history. Wherever I was living, I would stick to certain foods and I would eat them over and over again. So I have a certain food that I would eat in every country.
Do you feel a sense of security around that?
I don't think I would connect it to security. I think it is really just preference, and I feel hungry for that food. So I find something that I really, really like, and I will eat it over and over again. So in Bali, it was this amazing avocado toast with grated carrots, which were lightly roasted in the oven with confit tomatoes, that's what they're called, and sesame seeds. And sometimes I would have poached eggs, but I don't really eat eggs much. But it was just the perfect combination. And they had some kind of lemon crest stuff, like some leaves that tasted really lemony. It was just perfect. So yeah, I would eat that over and over again.
I have 90% of those ingredients downstairs, and that sounds amazing. Breakfast tomorrow.
And the bread was sourdough bread, so really nicely crunchy, crusty. Yeah, it was really good. Okay. Well, we are talking about food today, so maybe we inspired some other people. Yeah, so these are the things that I would recommend when it comes to your children and yourself. Really focus on the taste. That is super, super important. And we're going to get into this for every other layer that we're getting into the determinations, because you can really use this and play with this, especially when you have a child that is a fussy eater. But the time has to be perfectly exact for it to work. And on top of that, they're usually choosing the foods that are best for them naturally, instinctively. So trust your toddlers in making these decisions. Okay, so the next one we're going to be talking about is thirst. And here you have, if your arrow is pointing to the left, you have a hot thirst. And if it's pointing to the right, you have a cold thirst. So this is still connected to hunter and gatherer, because this is kind of when the fire was invented. So this is where it's starting to be more connected to having food that is hot, and it doesn't have to be boiling hot. It can just be warm, or having foods that is cold. So it's relatively simple to understand this one, but just understanding, or if you see this in your chart, really try it out. I had a client who was struggling with digestion, and I recommended her to try to eat more cold foods. And she wasn't naturally inclined to do that, but she did have more choices when it was coming to cold than when it was coming to warm foods. And this would also be regarding drinks. So it is thirst after all. So focusing on hot and cold beverages is also very important, and just testing it out. This is again also with your kids. If they have this in their chart, focus on hot or cold foods. And again, the cold also doesn't have to be frozen. It can just be room temperature.
I have a friend in the HD world who has cold thirst, and she'll like brew a pot of coffee, like a fresh pot of coffee, and always toss like 2 ice cubes in there because she doesn't like it steaming hot.
Yeah, this is also a way to do it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting for me as someone who just like enjoys her cup of joe in the morning with like frothed milk on top. I feel like it'd be sacrilege to put 2 ice cubes in it.
Especially for an Italian individual.
Dude, seriously.
Putting cheese on fish pasta or something, you get slaughtered.
It's like, yeah. Or it's like breaking up the spaghetti before you like put it in the pot.
Yeah. Or that.
Cool. I think the next 3 I think are interesting, because as Miko's pointed out, we go from this like hunter-gatherer like basic needs to things that we wouldn't necessarily think about when we are digesting or eating. And this next one being touch. So number 4 being touch. And if the arrow is pointing left, it is calm touch. If the arrow is pointing right, it's nervous touch. So with calm touch, the environment needs to be calm for this kind of person, right? Being stimulated in any way while they're eating can be really intense and not good for digestion. And also take into account that when we're speaking of digestion, I know I mentioned this in the beginning, right? Yes, it's physical digestion, but also consider digestion as taking in information. So any of this can be related to like study habits, or digesting information, or taking in information that really needs to be retained, right? So definitely take that into account when you're listening to this episode and as we continue through. So That's the calm environment versus the nervous environment. If you've ever seen a toddler need to be everywhere doing all of the things, they may have a nervous touch digestion. Basically, like they need to be doing something while they're eating. Stimulation is really ideal. And maybe that means your toddler's eating better when you're in a restaurant versus a more chill environment at home. Or maybe they're eating better when they are sitting in front of a screen. I don't particularly love that, but there can be different ways to kind of just get that energy out so that you as a human, I'm talking about kids because I feel like they're just their most selves, you know what I mean? But really it can be for anyone. So maybe as an adult, like bouncing up and down on your ball, although that seems not great for eating and trying to get the food in your mouth. Nonetheless, finding an environment where there is a little bit more going on can be really helpful for those who have nervous touch need for digestion. Any additional thoughts on this? Again, my mind just goes back to like toddlers like being everywhere.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. And even the bouncing on the ball, it can, because it's a nervous system stimuli, let's say it that way. So everything that stimulates your nervous system, this would also usually, if it's nervous determination, kids that are sitting in school doodling and fiddling around and moving a lot. This is also their way of digesting the information. So absolutely. And if you have the calm digestion, it's more about just being more still and relaxed, and working in a cafe would probably not be something that you should do. But again, try yourself out, see how it works and see how it feels. And all of these tips are about easing your digestion. It makes it easier for you to digest. It's not that this is a must. It's just going to support your digestive system. The thing to point out here as well regarding kids, have foods that feel different. Have some broccoli on there, have some carrots on there, have some pancakes on there. All of that feels different, and let them play with their hands. Let them touch their food. And this is how also for you as an adult, when you're in the supermarket, touch the food. When you're at the market, touch the food. See how it feels to you. Very important part.
That just reminded me of going shopping with my grandma, and she would literally like pick everything up. She'd like grab a couple of grapes because like those are free. Not. I'm just like picturing going shopping with my nonna right now. I don't know if that was her determination or not, but that's the first thing that popped into my head.
That's funny. Yeah, it could be. The next one is called sound. And pointing to the left, the arrow would say high sound, and pointing to the right, it would be low sound. So that doesn't mean that you're going to have to blast your stereo when you're in high sound environments, but to simply have some kind of sounds around you. So it also depends on what your environment looks like. In this case, I would always, it's again a combination of your chart, just needing to understand all of how it's linked together. But definitely having some kind of acoustic stimuli will support your digestion. So this is when when you have high sound, and when you have low sound, it's more about being in silence. And I know a couple where it's entirely opposite. So one has high sound, the other one has low sound, and I'm just like, oh my God, the one wants to talk all the time during lunch and dinner and breakfast, and the other one is just like, I need my silence and space. But yeah, to me that is also fascinating. And again, you can apply this to your kids when they need to study for something, and or when they're eating, to just have they probably play music on themselves or have something playing in the background. But it can also help a toddler digest food more easily.
Such cool insights, I think. I'm trying to think if I had roommates that did this. I had one roommate, God, I don't know, in college. She would like go hardcore with music, but then I think there were also, you know what? There was a multitude of factors there. I'm not going to go too deep into that. There was a lot happening with that boo-boo kitten. Anyway, On to the next one.
Well, it does, but human design really helps you to accept, if not appreciate, the differences that we have in each other. So I feel it just makes it so much easier to me. Even if I don't know someone's design, I can say, hey, they probably have this in their chart and it's probably right for them, even if it's not at all the case. But it kind of helps me to just be more accepting.
That's fair. I just found out someone else's chart this week and I was like, oh my God, it makes so much sense. So I can relate to that. Yes, 100%. Just gives you a deeper understanding, even if it's just for you, right? Even if it's not, oh yeah, that's totally their design. If you're like, you know what, that could be part of their design and that's just them. It's fine.
Exactly.
All right. Last but not least, this is light. So when the arrow is pointing left, it is direct light. And if it's pointing right, it's indirect light. So think about from a direct perspective, daylight is super important. Imagine if you have direct light, you are a plant and you need to be in the sunshine to digest and take in that information or to eat and to digest fully. With indirect, I'm going to go back to direct because this is me. I am direct light and I can speak to this. So I think it's important to note with direct light, like if you are in, regardless of what hemisphere you're in, if it's wintertime, it can be really challenging to eat during the bright part of the day without just straight up fasting. And that's a whole different thing that we can talk about. I think that there's a multitude, from a dietitian perspective, I think there's a multitude of factors that can go into fasting, and maybe that's relevant to your chart, maybe it's not, but just glossing over that real quick. If you do need to eat during the winter time and say the sun goes down at 4 p.m. and you're like, dude, but I'm still hungry. But for me, if I eat after dark during the winter, then my stomach hurts at night and I don't sleep well. And this is from like real life experience. So maybe it happens to you, maybe it doesn't as a direct light person. However, sad lamps do help a lot with that. So oftentimes I would just eat in front of a sad lamp at night and then it would still be around like 6 or 7. I try not to push it any later than that because if not, my stomach just really hurts at night. So that's a really good point to make. And then on the contrary of that, the indirect light, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be eating during the day and you have to be nocturnal, right? Like you don't have to be a bat, but ideally eating in a shaded area, whether it's like outside of direct light, right? So for you guys, whether it's artificial or natural light, being in a shaded area can be really helpful. And it's also better to eat a little bit later. So embrace that like Spanish, French, stay out and eat dinner at like 10, 11 p.m. mindset. And that's actually really beneficial for you. So eating later in the day or eating earlier in the day before the sun comes up can be really beneficial for those who have indirect light. And really focusing on hydrating and taking in liquids during the day can also be really beneficial.
Yeah, and what I really like about this human design perspective on digestion is that it also tears apart a lot of the you have to. For example, you have to eat before 6 p.m. If you're an indirect light, so if you digest better in shade or at nighttime, this rule is really not healthy for you if this is your exact birth time. So eating after the sun went down is going to feel better for you. These are naturally often individuals who also enjoy having nighttime jobs. They prefer being up at night. They prefer studying late into the night as well. So you may have a kid who's going to be best at studying midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And this is going to make sense for them. So it's really important to understand that there is never a go-to, this is right for everyone in diet. And I think this is something Celestina probably most definitely experienced throughout her career as a dietitian, registered dietitian. And I personally studied for the natural health or the health practitioner, the natural doctor in Germany. So I also went into a lot of details when it came to diets. I tried out a whole bunch because, third line phase. So I really tried many, many, many different things, and just to experiment and see what it does with me. And when you look again at the variables, if you have a left-facing arrow in general, you will have this active digestion, which we talked about at the beginning. And then there are a few more elements in your chart that could really be pointing to you not fasting very well. So in my chart, I am in the lower trigram. So this already points to hunter-gatherer. And for me, it is not healthy. I have the left pointing arrow, so I have a very fast digestion. So for me, it is not really healthy to fast. I have a few more elements in my chart that also point to that. But this is just something to bear in mind, that fasting is not for everyone, even if it has shown to cure cancer in most people, or there are many, many different studies that are showing the benefits of it. But this is, again, it's like looking at 70% of the population being manifesting generator or a generator, and then dividing the whole rest of the population into these other types. And to just put a general rule onto yourself, it doesn't work. So that's why you should always follow your strategy and inner authority and test out what works for you. And having a personal reading can very much support you on this journey, because you get to understand more of what supports you and what doesn't. And you just stop poking around in the haystack trying to find that needle. So for me, it helped me so much with my clients to just say, okay, try this and let's go from here. And if that doesn't work, which shows in your chart that it should work, then we can start poking around. But at least we already feel like we have a needle in our hand, and we can just continue from there. Another point, looking at your chart, you would have the 5 and 15th gate. These are, again, elements that are pointing to a rhythm in life. The 5th gate is more about routines and structures, and the 15th gate is more about go with the flow. And this is, again, very superficial level, but it can point to that in your chart, and it has a strong emphasis in that. It just depends as well which planet is defining it, how it is defined, what other elements are playing a part in your chart. But the 5th gate, which I also have defined, is going to come out stronger or less strong for me, because my sacral is not naturally defined. So I have an undefined sacral. And that means I don't have a consistent energy flow towards this gate. So my structure can be disrupted from time to time, especially if a 15th gate comes into my life.
Are you talking about me? I feel like you're talking about me.
So yeah, we create the channel 15-5, and when we're together, the 15th gate, aka Celestina, can disrupt my rhythm and flow. However, she can also potentially give me more rhythm and flow, because I then have the sacral defined. We both then have the sacral defined. So understanding this and knowing this is really very helpful, because we have more consciousness about how we interact with one another, and we can be more aware of, if I feel like, no, I really don't want to do my yoga exercises in the morning, I can be like, hey, come on, this is just influenced by my external when I've been doing this every single morning when I'm by myself. But yeah, it does give me a more consistent energy towards my 5th. The other channel that I would like to talk about is connecting your root to your sacral. And now we're going to get into the points regarding eating meat, being a vegetarian, or a vegan. So this channel 52-9 has a lot to do with meat. If this is completely defined in your chart, so if it is connecting your sacral with your root, then you have an easier time digesting meat. However, in human design, what is said is that eating red meat in particular is something that should be done as a ritual. So human design has a channel 1949, and this channel is also going through a bit of a metamorphosis at the moment until 2027. But let's focus on the meat eating part of this. So when you're looking at the 1949 channel, this is our pact with the animal kingdom. So especially red meat. This disregards poultry and fish, for example, at the moment. We have an easier time digesting poultry and fish than we do red meats, just generally speaking. But if you have the channel 952, you already have an easier time digesting meat, and you probably also crave it. Just really, if you have it, listen to that sacral response. Respond to your food, which is also another really important part that we're going to get into just for a little bit, that you still need to follow your strategy and inner authority. And if you have this channel, respond to meat. Have it maybe in your fridge, but if you don't feel like eating it, don't eat it. But this usually points to someone that really craves meat or loves meat, unless you've been conditioned and you can digest it. So the 1949 channel is our pact with the animal kingdom, where we're saying, hey, we are going to hunt you, but we're not going to overhunt you. We're not going to use and abuse this pact. However, we're doing that at the moment. So we are keeping them in stalls, we're over hunting, over killing, we're just producing way too many meat products. We're not eating all of it. So that is one of the challenges, that we have broken our pact with the animal kingdom. The next channel that becomes important when digesting meat is the 3740. So this is our connection to the stomach. And the reason we have this pact with the animal kingdom is that we said we will hunt you, but we will only hunt you for special occasions. So this is only going to be connected to ceremonies. And within the ceremonies, we're gathering a lot of people. We're coming together. And when you're having many people come together, you're automatically going to be, at some point, defining these channels. So you're going to have the whole flow of the 1949 going to the 3740. And this creates an optimal way of how you digest meat. So if you're having meat, try to really focus on eating it in the aura of many other people. So either with a group of friends, or if you really crave meat, then go to a restaurant and eat it. Otherwise, if you're living in an apartment building, you're probably already getting auras from several different individuals. But it's really just best to stick to eating it with a group of people so that you can digest it best. So as you can see, yes, there can be a recommendation regarding being a meat eater or being a vegetarian. Some people handle it better than others. There's, again, no general advice here. And again, you need to look at the individual chart. But if you would just leave your kids be, if you would just say, hey, just go with whatever you feel drawn to, they would make these natural decisions. Your chart would just come into play if you're free to make decisions from within you without being conditioned. And this is from a very early age onwards. This is not about talking to your already conditioned teenager and having them make decisions because they're going to be influenced by Instagram, by their peers, by things that you have placed on top of them. So there are many different elements that play a role here. But it's just an important part to consider.
From a dietitian perspective, take this with a grain of salt, but play with it.
So the last part we would like to talk about is the type. And we're just going to stick to a very basic information regarding this, where if you have your sacral defined, that also plays a role in you being able to digest things a bit more easily and more consistently. If your sacral is undefined, so if you're a manifestor, a reflector, or a projector, you may need smaller portions. You may not need such big plates to fill your stomach. You may just need smaller portions and can digest smaller portions easier than huge plates in front of you. So this is also something, of course, that you can have conditioning for it, because you've watched all the generators in your family pile on huge plates of foods, maybe. If you are a generator and you don't feel that this resonates with you, there are other elements which increase this or reduce this aspect within your chart. So this is just something that we still wanted to point out. And now Celestina would probably also like to share with us a bit of the dietitian advice regarding meat. Or we would love to hear it.
I think food in general, right? There are so many different, as Miko said earlier, there's so many different diets that as dietitians we were told to recommend, or studies have proven that they are proven, quote unquote, that they are the best, right? I think the only thing that you really need to lean into is your self-intuition, right? You inherently know if you can shake through the external factors of diet culture, and I know that's a lot, right? Like it's easier than me just saying that. But if you can work with someone, a dietitian, to kind of release what you're holding on to from diet culture, and you can lean into that intuitive, what am I feeling right now? What do I need right now? Your body will tell you, right? And I know that sounds hippy-dippy, but hey, that's what we're here for. Yeah, so all of that to say is, man, things in moderation, eat vegetables, but also listen to what your body needs, right? I can't give you a definitive meat is bad, veggies are the only good thing, right? Because as we've discussed this whole episode, there are so many different kinds of humans out there who are going to benefit from potentially having a better protein source, potentially having a variety of fruits and veg, you know? So it really breaks down to is, I don't have the answer as a dietitian, and that's okay. Ooh, feels so good to say that as a manifestor sometimes too, right? Just like, I don't have the answer, I don't have all the answers, and it's okay. But leaning into what feels best for you is what's going to be best for you. And I guess to give you a little bit of insight on meat, right? If you are eating grass-fed beef that hasn't been treated with hormones, has been loved on, it can contain as much, if not more, omega-3s than salmon in the wild. So it really is, it breaks down to the quality of the food that we're consuming. And I can go down a whole rant on the chemicals that are in our food, but that's not going to help us, to be honest. It really just breaks down to, hey, if you can afford better food for you and your family, amazing. If not, do the best with what you got and prioritize what you need and what your family needs, in part based off of what we've said here today, but in part listening to that intuition, like from yourself.
Great, Chelism. Adding that to the book. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's just super important to listen to your intuition. That's, if you took anything from all of this, then follow that, no matter what is designed in your, or what is showing up in your chart. The fascinating thing about this is that this is really, we mentioned this in the last episode already, but figuring out what your physical body needs is going to be what is carrying all of this. So what we're trying to do with human design is to go back into our physical bodies and out of the mind. So we always say this, it is not about disregarding the mind and saying that the mind is bad, but it has its purpose, and the purpose is not for it to make decisions. That's what our body is for. And for us to understand our intuition and hear these, hey, you should be doing this, these advices, we need to be in tune with it, and we need to feed it properly, and we need to exercise accordingly. So this is what we're trying to do with all of this, is just You need to start with diet and exercise. And once you're bringing balance into these areas of your life, you're starting to unblock these layers. You're starting to unblock your physical layer, and you're starting to gain a bit more insight into how it is speaking to you. What are the triggers? What are the sensations that are released when you're eating something good versus when you're eating something bad? And this is not to say good or bad as a judgment, but this is good or bad for you. So something that is supportive in your health and something that doesn't support your health as much. So even when we're talking about physical health system, when we're talking about exercise, the time needs to be right. So even if you have this in your chart, even if you're a direct light person and you feel like this doesn't resonate with you yet, this can either be due to the wrong time that you have in your birth certificate, or it is because your time has not come yet. And forcing this is not going to do any good. So all you can do is follow your strategy and inner authority. But if you want to really force only eating in direct light, for example, and something always comes in the way for some reason, maybe it's not the time yet. That is it from my side.
And that was this episode in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate having you here.
Guys, always feel free to reach out to us on Instagram at HeartCoreHD. We'd love to chat there. So hit us up and we'll have a conversation.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.